Ever wondered why the world has become so crazy and fucked up? It's not your imagination. It really is. And today I'm going to tell you one of the main reasons why it is and what can be done about it. Before I get started, here's a nice relaxing backdrop of the Slackjaw Forest to walk through as I go into this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, folks. If there's one thing I hear about constantly, it's how difficult it has become to function in the world because so much of the world seems to have collectively lost its fucking mind. And I completely agree with that. Now, I realize what I'm about to say may sound shocking, perhaps brutal, but such is the reality of life. And if those realities continue to be ignored, we will continue to spiral down into a tribal, chaotic, social shitstorm. Just the other day, for example, I was pulling into a store and there was a car wanting to pull out on my driver's side, opposite my door. But he couldn't pull out because I was blocking him in. And I was blocking him because I needed to back up a few feet. But I couldn't do that immediately because there was another vehicle behind me pulling into an empty spot directly behind me. So this situation should be simple enough. All the first guy pulling out had to do was wait a few seconds until I could back up so he could pull back out, which is what he eventually did, except he had to go completely fucking crazy in the process. Once he had completely pulled out, then slowly started going forward to leave the lot, he had pulled down his window right across from mine and was screaming obscenities and flashing incomprehensible signs with his hands. All I know is that the approximate 10 fucking seconds he had to wait caused him to erupt with hate-filled vulgarities towards me. I don't know exactly what he was saying, however, because I don't speak Ghettoese, which, in case you don't know, is a hybrid language of Black, Latino, and Hillbilly. Now, had I been his age, I'm guessing he was around 25 or 30, and around the same social IQ level, it's very possible, if not likely, that the same incident would have ended up with a physical confrontation and or gunfire, because that is the state we have devolved to. And if you've ever had to deal with any kind of crazy shit like this yourself, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This leads us to the obvious question. Why? So, do you really want to know the reason why? Even the most unintended perceived provocation can end up in what's commonly referred to as road rage and even death. Of course you do. So if you know what's good for you, keep your ass watching, bro. Actually, these kinds of actions, which most persons who are actually classified as mentally deficient seem like pleasant geniuses by comparison, are typically committed by people who have seldom, if ever, encountered a reality of life known as accountability and consequences. Allow me just to give a brief history lesson, which will hopefully illustrate how we have arrived where we are now. I'm going to talk about cops for just a bit. Now, depending on many factors, which certainly means your socioeconomic status, a fancy term to obfuscate the truth I'm saying if one is fucking rich or poor. Your views on cops may be very different. I understand that. But generally speaking, and again, I know some cops can be real pigs. Cops often have really difficult jobs, and they are having to deal with things that simply didn't exist 40 years ago. So let me give you a very clear picture of what it was like dealing with cops 40 years ago. Generally speaking, you were expected to be respectful and do, without an attitude or disrespect, whatever the fuck the cop told you to do. And generally speaking, if you held up that end of the bargain, cops didn't go out of their way to make you miserable. But on the other hand, if you had an attitude and refused to comply with the officer's simple request, let's just say you weren't handled with kid gloves. Back then, if you were being a loud, argumentative, and non-compliant asshole, regardless of the reason, they had the ways and means to bring your ass under control real fast. And I say this because I personally witnessed it many, many times back then. For example, a very common occurrence, especially on the weekends, were people charged with D&D or drunk and disorderly. But here's the difference between that charge today and what it once was. The cops then totally understood what was going to happen just about every weekend. And frankly, they really didn't care much about the fact you were drunk. What they were concerned about was the disorderly part. And if they couldn't easily talk any kind of reason with you, your ass was unceremoniously, and certainly not carefully, thrown into what was then known as the paddy wagon. The term paddy wagon has history all its own, and if you're curious, I can explain it to you another time. And there was a good reason for that. You see, back then, in the world I lived in, which had something called actual consequences, getting arrested, I'm still specifically speaking of drunk and disorderly here, was not supposed to be a pleasant experience. So when your ass was thrown in the paddy wagon, if you received more bangs and bruises, that's something called a consequence. And if a person had any intelligence whatsoever, they were supposed to learn from that unpleasant consequence. That is the fucking purpose of pain, that one learns to avoid it, especially if they were the ones who were irresponsible and or fucking idiotic enough to be the cause of such pain. But now, and I have also personally witnessed this many times, the level of animalistic brutality that cops often have to endure is totally stupefying. And as I said before, yes, I know there are some bad cops. Yet the new role of cops making an arrest looks like a cross between a hypersensitive psychotherapist and Jesus Christ, something they should never be expected to be. Now, getting back to my original scene with the foul-mouthed lunatic I was dealing with in the parking lot. What I can tell you with a great deal of certainty is that most people who do that kind of thing have never actually faced a real consequence for such behavior or actions in their entire lives. If, for example, that same scenario happened in a different time and place, this is before such social defectives weren't all packing guns, that guy very likely could have been beaten to an absolute pulp for such animalistic behavior, and no cops to rescue his idiotic ass, and no ambulance service either. I feel pretty confident that he would never pull that same dysfunctional animalistic bullshit behavior again, and neither would any of his friends. And if any of you out there think this is cruel, I don't give a damn, because I can objectively tell you what works for a society and what doesn't. So, having spoken my piece, I'll just finish with this. I've watched, witnessed, and experienced many different kinds of antisocial craziness for many years, from asinine high-speed car chases to resisting arrest situations, you name it. But in the case of all of these, the main thing they have in common for all the dysfunctionals doing this shit is that any potential arrest, that's assuming they're even caught, and resulting jail time is relatively pleasant, which is why they keep repeating the behavior, because actual punishment has become an abstraction. A severe beating and or tar and feathering, on the other hand, is quite real and memorable. I absolutely love the beauty and harmony of nature, which includes its wild animals, but I have no tolerance for the two-legged variety. So, if you found this episode informative or entertaining, please consider subscribing. And if you just want to reach out to me with whatever's on your mind, you can do so by clicking on my contact link in the description below. Until next time, this is Ernest, and that's all I've got for today.